Okay, we're going to get started right away because we have a lot of business to cover tonight. It is Wednesday, October 25th, 2023, and I call to order the fourth and perhaps final night of the October special town meeting. I want to thank all our presenters and speakers from Monday night for a thoughtful and cogent debate. I hope and expect that tonight's debate will be in the same caliber. Lastly, I want us to recognize two individuals who've gone above and beyond to ensure that this town meeting runs smoothly. They've been working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that there are enough printouts of important documents, that presentations are organized and readily available even when last-minute corrections are made, that the aging infrastructure of Town Hall can hold together in the face of the unique demands of that town meeting places on it, and too many other heroics for me to enumerate. So please join me in showing our gratitude to our Deputy Town Manager of Operations, Christine Bongiorno, and our Town Clerk, Julie Brazil. We really could not do this without you. Thank you. Okay, let's now take the rise for the national anthem by Ms. Tanaka. Thank you. Mr. Helmuth?
Good evening, Eric Helmuth, Chair of the Select Board. Before I make this motion, I will note that expressions of growls or hisses or other expressions of disdain are not inappropriate after I make the following motion, if you are so moved. It is moved that if all the business of the meeting as set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session, when the meeting adjourns, it adjourns to Monday, October 30th, 2023 at 8 p.m.
Do we have a second? Just 1 second. We need 1 second. Okay, we got a second from Mr. Moore. The alternative is that I could just have Chief Flaherty lock the doors until we're done. All those in favor of adjourning until Monday at 8 p.m. say yes. Yes. All those opposed say no. Motion passes. Five people aren't standing, so we're moving on. We'll take a test vote now. Okay. If you agree, I'm sorry, before we get to the test vote, do we have the microphone in the balcony? Can someone locate the microphone up there, please? Okay. Can we get someone on that while we move along? Okay, yep. Oh, someone has unit 252. Please check your handsets. If it's number 252, please bring it to the side table. Okay. Mr. Weinstein was trying to steal someone's handset, it looks like. Okay. Okay, so I'll explain the vote. I'll be doing a lot of that tonight, I think. One recommended vote plus 13 amendments plus one secondary amendment equals 32,768 distinct outcomes. If you agree that that is the correct answer, press 1 for yes. If you disagree with that, press 2 for no. If you're perplexed, press 3 to abstain. Okay, voting is open. The green light is on. Okay, voting is closed. 85 in the affirmative, 32 in the negative, 65 abstentions. We'll go through the screens. Oh, you want me to tell you the answer? The answer is no. Mr. Weinstein?
Could you back away from the mic a bit?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is this better? Can everyone hear me from this distance? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. If all of the votes were independent, then the answer would be 32,768, because there's some overlap. You could vote on all these amendments all sorts of different ways, but then if you vote down the main motion as amended, that's one outcome, which is no action. There's another interaction with one of the Wagner amendments, which wipes out the bonuses section. It's somewhere in the vicinity of 10,000. I didn't do all the math because I was a little busy the last few days. Okay, did we cycle all the way through? Oh, we did, okay. Are there any, I'll now call for any announcements or resolutions as defined in town meeting time and the town bylaws. Mr. Tosti.
Fellow town meeting members, I've been active in town government for over 50 years. During that time, I was privileged to work with some incredible and very worthy public servants, both elected and appointed. But in my opinion, the most effective of those public servants in Arlington over that period was a man many of you probably do not know, but his name was Charlie Lyons. Charlie passed away just very recently. Time and again, over these, he displayed effort to move this town forward from one crisis to another, but always looking out for the best interests of this town. Much of his efforts were done behind the scenes that nobody knows about, to get officials to work together who really didn't want to work together. Sometimes he used a stick, sometimes he used a carrot, but he always seemed to be able to get people working together and moving forward. Charlie was the first elected official who was 18 years old in this country. He ran for school committee in the early 70s. But he really started, I think, most of his work when he was elected to the Board of Selectmen in 1980. The first thing he had to do was confronted with Proposition 2.5 had passed. He worked with my predecessor, Bob O'Neill, and other town officials, put together a plan, used the resources of the town very wisely, and we managed to get through those first 2 years of Prop 2.5 with losses in services, definitely, but not nearly to the degree that it might have without his efforts. In 1990, he co-led with John Billifer the first successful override in this town's history. In late 1990s, he co-led with myself and Barbara Goodman the first successful debt exclusion for the schools in this town's history. In 2005, he put together a plan working with a colleague of mine, Charlie Foskett, and developed what became known as the Lyons Plan for school committee, selectmen, and for the finance committee to work together under certain standards so everybody knew what they were going to do with certain adjustments along the way. That plan is still in use almost 20 years later. He deserves to be remembered. And Mr. Moderator, I ask you for a moment of silence.
Thank you, Mr. Tosti. May his memory be a blessing. Are there any reports of committees? Oh, do you have an announcement, Mr. Warden? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Warden, Precinct 8. Yeah, I have an announcement. After I spoke on the subject of affordable housing, my amendment number 1 Monday night, I received messages from 2 of my fellow town meeting members pointing out that the affordable housing aspect had already been addressed in the redevelopment board's recommended vote, which you have before you. It's one of those many underlined paragraphs. So I apologize for making you listen to my talk about affordable housing for 3 minutes the other night, well, roughly 3 minutes. And I don't know how I missed that in the thing, but the fact that one of my 3 eye doctors certified me as being legally blind may have had something to do with it. So anyway, I asked to leave the meeting to withdraw my amendment. Is that permissible, Mr. Moderator?
We have to withdraw the amendment?
Just Amendment 1.
Is there a procedure for withdrawing an amendment? I believe we just have to vote it down, no?
Well, whatever the chair rules the appropriate thing, but obviously I don't, it is, as has been said, superfluous. I wish they told me that in advance, and I would have not stood up here the other night.
Okay,
Thank you.
and this was Amendment 1. I'll take a note of that. Thank you.
Amendment 1, right.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Okay, do we have any other announcements or resolutions? Okay, seeing none. Let's see. Are there any reports of committees? If there are no hands for reports from committees, then we don't need to receive them. We don't need to do the whole tabling and untabling thing. Okay, let's move on. And Article 12 is still before us. Okay, so I have some comments here going into resuming debate on Article 12. At the end of Monday's meeting, I copied all the names of speakers in the live handset speaker queue, at least the first 31 of them that fit on one screen, and transcribed them into the same view as the pre-submitted requests so that they're all in one place side by side for you to see and for me to manage. Can we bring up the side-by-side queues right now? The display order of speakers in each queue has been preserved. Mr. Ezra Fisher was the last one to speak on Monday, so I'll remove him from the queue now. He should disappear. Well, his name should disappear from the list. And someone verify Mr. Fisher is still in the chamber. Let's see. If we exhaust all speakers and you'll see there's a column here in the middle, Monday handset queue. That's what I copied over. If we exhaust all those speakers, it actually goes down for quite a bit. That's not the end of it. If we exhaust that whole list before debate is terminated, which would probably be sometime in January, I will reopen the live speaker queue so that we can take more speakers via handsets at that time. I've received questions about how a name that appears in both queues is treated, so I'll be brief. In the instructions I gave to town meeting members, I think a week or two ago, I stated, motions to terminate debate will be recognized by the moderator only from the live speaker queue at the meeting. That is still the case, with one clarification that a motion to terminate debate will be allowed from the Monday handset queue, even though it's not technically live, it came from the live queue at the time. However, if your name appears in both queues and I recognize your name from the pre-submit queue, you can pass and retain your position in the live or Monday handset queue. I do not intend to recognize a speaker for a second time until everyone else has had a chance to speak on Article 12. Not that everyone has to speak on Article 12. Unfortunately, I do not have a complete record of everyone who spoke on Monday night. So if I recognize someone to speak tonight and you recall them already being recognized from one of the speaker queues on Monday and they try to sneak in a second appearance, please remind me. You know the 3 magic words that get my attention. Next, I want to address a message that Mr. Warden shared with me yesterday, and I'll try to be brief about this. Mr. Warden contends that the amount of additional housing unit capacity in the overlay districts should not be a matter of scope. And I'm paraphrasing here from his message. I'll skip over the parts where he gets a bit spicier. But his argument goes that if town meeting votes down the main motion, then there will be 0 additional capacity in the non-existent overlay districts. If a no vote on the main motion is within scope, and it always is, then amendments cannot be out of scope for reducing additional housing unit capacity in this case. Mr. Warden, in my judgment, is correct. There's no amount of reduction in additional housing unit capacity that can be out of scope in this case. Whether town meeting adopts a measure that satisfies Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A by the end of calendar year 2024 is a question for town meeting to debate and decide. So thank you, Mr. Warden, for your astute reasoning on this procedural matter. Lastly, I want to remind everyone that if you don't have anything particularly new to add beyond what prior speakers have already said, then please yield your speaking time by saying pass. If all you want to say is, I agree with so-and-so, there's already a procedure for that. It's called voting. Okay. Okay, so let's resume. All right, hold on. From the pre-submit queue, we're going to skip down to Mr. Helmuth. I might need to scroll down a little bit, who has a request to introduce a special guest tonight. Mr. Helmuth?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Eric Helmuth, Precinct 12. I'd like to introduce a resident of the town who also ably, more than ably, represents us in the Massachusetts State Senate, Senator Cindy Friedman, who would like to address the meeting.
Senator Friedman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and through you to the chair, and thank you all for having me tonight. I've been asked to talk about how this article fits in to a larger regional issue. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge the MBTA Communities Working Group and the ARB. As someone who's worked on a lot of boards and commissions, I know what it's like to have to deal with complex and sometimes contentious issues. And I would just like to say that I believe you all have done an extraordinary, exemplary job. And it's volunteers like you who keep our communities going. So thank you very much. And I also want to commend the town meeting members for this really excellent, civil, and honest debate. And thank you, Mr. Moderator, for setting the tone so gracefully, so clearly, and with humor. It's so nice to live in a town where civility and thoughtfulness rule. It's very rare these days, so thank you. So, to you all, absolutely. So, as a state senator representing Arlington, and I also live here, as many of you know, and surrounding towns, I am acutely aware of the needs for both a local and regional perspective. I have a local and regional perspective, and I am acutely aware of what is going on in terms of housing. And I sit with 39 other members who represent the state across our whole state, and I can tell you that our town and our regions are not alone in this issue. It is everywhere. And honestly, the pressure, especially from businesses, and the worry about the economic health of the state is growing stronger. It is clear to me that this administration is so concerned about this issue, as we all are, the issue of housing, that they're going to be very, very clear and very predictable and very strict about what they accept and what they don't, because it really, really is a major issue. We have an abundance, as you heard, I think people alluded to the other night, of capable young people that we are economically dependent on, and they can't afford to live here. They're our kids, they're people that have grown up in our town. They're moving away because of the difficulty of finding homes that they can afford. We lost 110,000 residents during COVID, and we continue to lose more. They tend to be young, they tend to be working families, and we can add recent graduates to that too of our Massachusetts colleges because they can't afford to live here either. This and the fact that we're not drawing enough young people into our state is exacerbating the problem. Again, they can't come here because they can't afford to live here. And we now have an acute labor shortage, and we're seeing it across all of our industries. Our healthcare, our manufacturing, our food sector cannot staff to capacity. And I'll just give you one data point. In the behavioral health space, we have between 200 and 400 beds offline because of a lack of workforce. That means that people that have acute behavioral health needs cannot get treatment. Folks who depend on our elderly, who take care of our elderly, who teach our children, who provide care for the most vulnerable, are leaving because they cannot afford a place to live. And we can't work our way out of this problem by increasing salaries and making our wages higher and higher and higher. The state can't afford that, our businesses can't afford that, and there just isn't enough housing. Businesses are making decisions, and I sit in meetings, businesses are making decisions not to come to Massachusetts because of the high cost of housing. This is a problem that has been building for many, many years, and now it's here. So you also have heard the other side of it, where we had the eloquent story from John about trying to find housing for his grandmother. People, seniors, people even my age, can't afford to move out of their houses because they have no place to go. And so we're being squeezed from both ends. And it, again, is not happening just in Arlington. It's happening everywhere in our state. There's no one solution to this problem. We have to do many things at once. Town meeting members that have gotten up and talked are correct. We need to build more housing. We need more affordable housing. We need housing at all income levels, not just for the wealthy. We need sustainable and green development. We need a transportation system that works so people can live farther out and get to work into our major hubs. And we need to provide the tools to our municipalities to support these efforts. We need to incentivize the building of housing for middle-class families, and so that they can afford to live here. We need to do it all at the same time. These are not mutually exclusive actions. We need everyone to be part of the solution to solve this problem. And Arlington, while you are small, you can make a difference. This article makes a difference. We don't live in isolated communities. We don't have walls around us. We are affected by what happens in other communities, and the other communities around us are affected by what we do. And the good news is, at least in the 4th Middlesex, where that I represent, towns are starting to set their goals, and they're starting to take this seriously. And that's good news for all of us. We're all trying to play a part in this solution. Arlington's warrant Article 12 will provide a meaningful framework for making progress in this area. It's one of the long-term solutions to this problem. And it's long-term. If we can reach our goal, and it will take many years, believe me, we will make a difference.
We're just about time, so if you could finish up, Senator.
Okay, I'll be finished in a second. I just cannot stress enough that this is seriously threatening the economic vibrancy of our community. And it's been a long time coming, and it's going to take a long time to fix, but this article can start that, and you can make the difference. I urge you to support this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Friedman. Before we resume the speaker queue, actually, and Ms. Pyle, you can come up because you'll be next. And if you're going to top that, maybe you can introduce the governor. I don't know. But I just did some very quick research. This is section 26 of town meeting time. Mr. Warden is correct for a second time tonight. There is a motion for withdrawal. Once the motion is in possession of the meeting, it can be withdrawn with a majority vote or unanimous consent. So all those in favor of withdrawing Warden Amendment 1 say yes. Yes. All those opposed say no. It is unanimous. Warden Amendment 1 is withdrawn. Ms. Pyle, you have the floor.
Thank you. Elizabeth Pyle, Precinct 8. I am a zoning and land use attorney. I am also a former member of the town's residential zoning study group, the RSG, which was created by town meeting to study the impact of zoning changes in Arlington's residential districts. Based on my experience, I am strongly opposed to the Bagnall-Fleming Amendment to increase the number of stories allowed in the neighborhood districts from 3 to 4 stories. Please vote against the Bagnall-Fleming Amendment. I also ask for your support for the Evans Amendment, which would slightly modify the map for the neighborhood districts while still keeping us in compliance with state law at 2,888 units. I served with Winnell Evans for 3 years on the RSG, and I am confident that she has done the calculations to make a better map that fixes problems with the main article while still giving us 842 units more than is required under state law. No one has shown that these calculations are incorrect. I urge you to vote no on the Bagnall-Fleming Amendment because 4-story buildings on our neighborhood side streets are just too much. A 4-story building on a side street will take a sunny yard and put it into permanent shade. A 4-story building with tight setbacks will decrease privacy. It's just too much out of scale with our existing homes. My constituents in Precinct 8 were very upset when the proposal to have 4-story buildings in the neighborhood districts was first raised. We submitted petitions and letters to the ARB advocating that building height in the neighborhood districts be limited to 3 stories or 35 feet in height. We did this because of the negative impacts on existing residents due to excessive height, too much massing, shadows, and loss of privacy that would occur from 4-story buildings on our side streets. We felt that 3-story buildings would be an acceptable compromise, and 4-story buildings, like we see in that new building on Mass Ave across from the high school, would be out of scale on our side streets. During the working group hearings, the stated reason for 4-story buildings in the neighborhood districts was so that elevators would be required for accessibility. However, we know now that this is not accurate. Our Director of Inspectional Services said on Monday night that elevators are not even required for 5-story buildings, and they are not required for 4-story buildings either. Therefore, the primary justification for pushing for 4 stories in the neighborhood districts is incorrect. Another reason I am opposed to 4 stories, and why I also support the Evans Amendment to change the map for the neighborhood districts, comes from my experience on the residential study group. On the RSG, I quickly realized that it is not advisable to have a one-size-fits-all approach to zoning changes in Arlington because of the widely varying topography in town. The hills in the heights make for very different zoning outcomes than on the relatively flat areas in East Arlington, especially when you consider building height, number of stories, and what qualifies as a story under our zoning bylaws due to changes in grade. Under Arlington's zoning bylaw, the maximum building height is measured using a calculation based on the highest point of the roof above the average finished grade of the ground. This is technical, but it means that building heights appear even higher on sloping lots with steep grades due to the calculation. I am troubled that the working group did not consider the topography of Arlington Heights by reviewing all actual ground conditions when it drew the map, even though this point was raised during the process. Instead, it appears that lines were just drawn without consideration of topography. This is a serious flaw in the design of the proposed overlay districts because it does not take account of impacts associated with locating a tall building on an already elevated hill or on a steep grade. Such grade changes are present throughout the heights as you move away from Mass Ave. The Evans Amendment fixes this problem, but the Bagnell-Fleming Amendment makes it worse. A 4-story building on a hill would be so greatly out of scale with existing homes, towering over them in a way that has not been considered. Arlington's hilly topography supports voting in favor of the Evans Amendment, which slightly reduces the size of the overlay district through common sense adjustments to the map. The Evans Amendment scales back the size of the neighborhood districts and addresses this problem with our sloping topography by keeping the overlay close to Mass Ave and not up into the hills. 2 weeks ago, the ARB unanimously agreed that 4 stories in the neighborhood districts was excessive, and my neighborhood was pleased to see the 3-story limit in their recommended vote. I urge you to vote against the Bagnell-Fleming Amendment so we can keep this common sense 3-story limit. If the Bagnell-Fleming Amendment passes, I will vote against the main motion, and I ask that you do the same. If the Bagnell-Fleming Amendment fails, and the Evans Amendment passes, I plan to vote for the main motion, and I suggest that you do the same. I also encourage you to consider the other amendments that reduce the impact of Article 12 so that we comply with the MBTA law now, but also leave room for the future mandates that are coming down the line from the state. If the legislature requires municipalities to create additional overlay districts, which is likely to occur, being cautious now will give us more space to enact zoning changes down the line. If a reduced plan is ultimately successful, it can always be expanded once we have real-world data on impacts to school enrollment, traffic congestion, and town finances. This is the common-sense, cautious approach that I urge you to take. And Senator Freeman is right. Housing is a regional issue. Let's share in the burden with all the other municipalities and not take on too much too fast here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Point of order, Ms. Friedman.
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. I don't believe we took Article 12 off the table.
We didn't.
Oh, we didn't.
We did not. It was not on the table.
Oh, it wasn't on the table.
No.
Oh.
Yep. Thank you. If we scroll down, I'll now take, Ms. Kepka had a issue with her handset that I verified earlier today, and so she's actually at the bottom of the pre-submit queue that I asked her to submit to the form, and so I believe she has a guest to introduce as well.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Asha Kepka, Precinct 1. I'd like to introduce Arlington resident Jeffrey Bremer.
And Mr. Bremer, are you a resident of the town of Arlington?
I'm a resident of Arlington, 3032 Newman Way.
Great. Can you state your name as well, for the record?
My name is Jeffrey Brahmer.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Okay. And moderator, can I ask one question?
Yes.
Can you prompt me at 5 minutes?
When there's 5 minutes left or 5 minutes in?
5 minutes in. I want 2 minutes to the end.
Yep.
Let me know when I can start.
Go ahead.
But I'm not on the clock yet, so.
You are. It's going.
Oh, okay.
It's Ms. Kepka's time.
My first thought, I want to apologize to this meeting. I've been here 35 years, and the first meeting I came to was last Monday night. And that's on me. I want to know your faces. I want to know your names. And I think that's important. I wrote a letter. And as you know, that letter, it came from you also. It didn't really come from me. It flowed out of me the next morning. But it came when a gentleman, who I don't know your name, you can come and introduce yourself at some point, because I'd like to know your name. He said he found a kind of a gap between the impacted neighborhoods, and he also felt the gap. He didn't know what they were thinking. He didn't know what their complaints were. And basically, at least on my street, 4 different people, we never remember receiving that letter, okay? And then when I heard the comments on, well, we're kind of sending you a letter, but it really doesn't mean anything, that kind of inspired that letter. And I don't want to dwell on it because you already have it. But I think it's important as we move forward that the lines of communication, particularly when we enter into the zoning issue and everything that's going to do, we have to make sure that there's good communication between the citizenry, its representatives, and the town. And if the citizens are not well informed, they can't participate. And they will get angry, they will get disempowered, and they will also feel rage. And then it will separate neighbors from neighbors and neighborhoods from neighborhoods. And as we move into this process, it is absolutely vital that Arlington be together at all forms of its citizenry and its representatives, and also of the town members. Newman Way is kind of at the epicenter, and it'll become more clear as I talk about it. We are a very little street, okay? But it's also one of the most diverse areas in Arlington. On our right, one street away is Whole Foods. Right in front of the street, we're literally at the CVS. Just cross the street, next to the high school, we're at CVS. We have the high school. We have 2 banks. 2 blocks down the road, we have Stop and Shop. And at the very end, so we're very diverse. There's a lot going on. We have a lot of development, commercial, business, and everything in our little street, okay? Now, there's an apartment at the end of our street, pretty big apartment. And in some ways, it makes us one of the most diverse areas of Arlington, both racially and also economically. However, it's kind of beginning to change. New owners from outside Arlington, I believe, bought that apartment building several years ago, and now they're raising rents to $600 to $750 a month for tenants, some of who have lived there 20 years, okay? Long-term tenants. Early in September, there was a demonstration. About 50 people showed up. There was a band. Someone gave speeches. Our 2 state reps showed up, and others, okay? But my question is, listening to about affordable housing, listening about our concern for young people and tenants and others. So my question is, what if all the town meeting came to that demonstration? What would the tenants think? Would they feel that they're part of the town? Or do they feel kind of abandoned? Like, we talk about affordable housing, but how are we supporting those who are going to be kicked out of Arlington? And what would the landlord think? If he sees 50 people versus he's seeing 200 people, it's a very different image. It's very different on the news. So this is something we need to think about as we move forward. Newman Way. When high school is in session, we're the high school parking lot.
So we have 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. 2 minutes left?
2 minutes left, yeah.
Okay, go forward, okay? We're a neighborhood, so let me move very quickly. Boy, 7 goes very fast, doesn't it? Okay. The bottom line question is what Mr. Warden basically stated. Who is our neighbor? Our neighbor are the people who are going to be impacted. We have all these questions. We didn't feel we were informed correctly enough. We're afraid they're going to put 4 stories in our little neighborhood. We are already diverse. On our street, 9 out of 12 units are already double families with tenants and now you're asking us to do more, okay? I'm going to give 4 quick gifts. Some comes from my past wife who died at her home, and one is everything passes away but love. Pray before you decide. Pray while you're reading and deciding, and pray afterwards. The other day I was walking through the parking lot of that thing where I put my dog poop in their big dumpster, okay? And my wife, I said, Ann, what should I say to this meeting? And she said, tell them they're not alone. I said, what do you mean? She said, you have each other when you're making this decision. Secondly, you have all the people who are in that first burial ground right down the hall, a few street over here, right next to us. Jason Russell. You have Squaw Satcham. You have Elizabeth Russell, Samuel Pierce, and others, Solomon Pierce. They are all with you tonight in your decision making. They are part of the air we breathe. They are part of our hopes and of our dreams.
We're at time, Mr. Brummer.
Okay. I messed up, but I did the best I could. That was 7 minutes?
7 minutes.
Thank
Great.
you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brummer. Mr. Schlickman, you're up next. Let's see, from the Monday handset queue. And there we go.
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9, and a member of the Arlington School Committee. While wearing my school committee hat, I have been asked about the impact of the MBTA Communities Act on our schools. My answer? Not much. Let me first state the role of the school committee. Our job is to welcome any child who lives in our town, make them feel that they belong in our community, and provide a world-class education. We don't raise the drawbridge, we pull up another chair. That's our history. As Arlington entered the last century, electric streetcars were generating residential growth in Arlington. Developers began carving farms into streets and building lots, extending from the very same transit corridors we are looking at tonight. Our population grew rapidly as developers met the need for housing. Between 1890 and 1900, Arlington's population increased 71%. Between 1920 and 1930, it was a 93% increase. After World War II, we met the housing needs of returning veterans. And in 1970, Arlington was home to 53,524 people. In the last census, our population was 46,306, which means we certainly have room to welcome at least 7,221 more new neighbors. The MBTA Communities Act will not generate the growth we experienced in the last century. We are looking at a zoning overlay district layered on existing zoning and existing buildings that increases the capacity for housing units. To turn capacity into reality, someone needs to renovate or demolish and rebuild an existing structure. Redevelopment, by its nature, is glacial. We are not a small town. We need to use streetcar as an adverb when describing Arlington as a suburb. In reality, we are a self-governing urban neighborhood. Consider that the center of Arlington, the corner of Mass Ave, Pleasant, and Mystic Streets, is 6 miles from our State House. Most Americans who live 6 miles from the center of a major city live in that city. For my fellow New Yorkers, consider 165th Street in Manhattan is 6 miles from Times Square, as is Queens Boulevard and 55th Road in Elmhurst. Barack Obama's Chicago home in the Hyde Park neighborhood is more than 6 miles from State and Madison, the center of that city's grid, and Wrigley Field is 4.75 miles from State and Madison, the exact same distance between our State House and Monotony Grill. Up until 1975, Arlington met the challenge of regional population growth. Rieko and I live in an 895 square foot 8th floor condo built in 1971. It was built just before Arlington revised its zoning bylaw to block dense residential development. In 2002, when I bought my condo, it was a challenge to find an affordable home in a tight market. It's much more of a challenge today. I represent Precinct 9, which stretches along the north side of Mass Ave from Wyman Street to Grove Street. A solid majority of my good neighbors in my precinct live in multifamily housing within a block or two of Mass Ave. Article 12 sets the stage to build more of the housing people like me and my neighbors need in order to live in Arlington. Watering down or rejecting the recommended vote will close the door on people like me and my wife and my neighbors who seek housing in this town. That is why I hope my friends and colleagues in town meeting will defeat the Wagner, Babiar's, Warden, Loretti, Lane, and Evans amendments. Any one of these amendments, or a combination of these amendments, can push the outcome to noncompliance. Meanwhile, I will support the efforts by Ms. Anderson, Mr. Bagnell, and Mr. Fleming to enhance the redevelopment board's solid recommendations. And one more note. The question was raised if town meeting members would want to be included in this overlay district. The answer is obvious. Mr. Leone's family home was excluded, and he wants in.
We cannot project that as a representative sample.
Let him in, because the vote before us on Article 12 is good for him, good for us, and good for Arlington. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schlichtman. Okay, so next we'll take a pre-submitted question, if we can scroll over. Ms. Carr-Jones, if you want to come up and make any remarks while I read this. My neighbors have, I'll start the clock because we're reading the question. My neighbors have voiced a concern that town meeting may need to vote on Article 12 before we know if the state will allow us to apply Arlington's 15% affordable inclusionary zoning bylaw to the MBTA communities overlay districts rather than the 10% maximum. Is that the full question? It is not. There we go. Affordable, actually I have it here. The maximum affordable specified in the MBTA communities law. What assurances can we provide that Arlington's higher affordability standards will be allowed in the overlay districts? Is anyone from the ARB or the Planning and Community Development? Director Ricker?
Hi, I'm Claire Ricker. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. What assurances can we give? I think we need to only look at recent developments that have been successfully permitted and successfully built in Arlington, including one in my first year here that I was able to be a part of at 80 Broadway, with 9 units, which would give us 1 affordable unit, commercial on the first floor, and a neighborhood contextual development. There are several others that I could point to. 882 Mass Ave, has 22 units with 3 affordable units. We've been able to successfully apply Arlington's inclusionary zoning bylaw to both of those projects. Another thing I might want to hasten to point out is the number of 40B projects that have been permitted in Arlington that require a minimum affordability of 25%, and yet those seem to be coming to us about every other year now, with at least some understanding of the developer that they are going to be successful in their development. Now, those developments are different than the ones that have been permitted, the smaller scale. With our inclusionary zoning bylaw. The more units that you can build, obviously, the more affordability, the more subsidy you can provide to these units. But I think the success of several recent projects, as well as the continued interest in 40B developments in our town, could be at least some assurance or at least some evidence pointing to the idea that the state will approve our economic feasibility analysis and our inclusionary zoning bylaw. Thank you. You're very welcome.
If you have other questions or statements?
I do have a statement.
Yeah, this is still your speaking time. Yep.
So Elizabeth Carr-Jones, Precinct 14. I actually still have a few questions, shockingly. I wanted to ask, what opportunities will we have to change the plan once it's approved by the state? And will downward adjustments to any of the overlays be possible? I'm assuming that increase of housing or things that will increase housing will be allowed.
Director Ricker? Oh, Ms. Zember.
Rachel Zemberry, Chair of the Redevelopment Board. So if town meeting, whatever town meeting approves, either tonight or in the future that goes to the state, once it's approved by the state, if the town wishes to make additional changes to that, we need to bring those changes back to town meeting for adjustments.
But the state would accept further changes in a downward direction?
In a downward direction, that I would have to defer to Director Ricker.
Thank you.
Director Ricker?
Kleriker, Director of Planning and Community Development. In the guidelines, it says ongoing obligations, rescission of a determination of compliance. After receiving a determination of compliance, an MBTA community must notify EOHLC in writing of any zoning amendment or proposed amendment that affects the compliant multifamily district. I imagine if so long as we were to maintain our compliance in terms of overall acreage and unit count, we would likely be looked at relatively favorably so long as we are still compliant with the rules of the law. But were we to do something that would somehow render us non-compliant, then the state reserves the right to rescind our approval.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's the rest of my questions. I do have some comments. I want to say that I'm very grateful to the working group for their commitment, to the redevelopment board for their oversight, and I want to thank all the residents who participated, informed themselves, reached out to me and others, both for and against, and improved the plan by sharing their ideas and asking questions. The process has enriched our understanding of zoning, and it's raised the level of discourse. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the map before us may generally appear to be balanced throughout the town. But like some of us, it has recently gotten a bit thicker in the middle. Thanks for getting that. Nearly a quarter of the overlay is now in Precinct 14. That's the precinct I represent. The density shift happened quite late in the process, and if I'm being honest, watching it happen made me wonder if things might have been different if someone at the decision-making table had been from my precinct. I support the Evans Amendment, which I believe would mitigate the situation, but would have preferred that it was incorporated in the main motion. I wanted to say this is, as a community, this is our place for examining disagreements and finding solutions. We don't need to all agree, but we should all be able to trust each other. On opening night invocation at town meeting in April, the town's poet laureate, Jean Flanagan, read from the Irish poet John Donohue's "To Bless the Space Between Us." She began with, "May you be compassionate with your criticism and give the grace of encouragement." That's it. Thanks, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Carr-Jones. Next, we'll take Dr. Morocco. Pass. Take Mr. Rosenthal from the live speaker queue next. Mr. Rosenthal? Are you? Okay. Actually, to move this along, we'll take, okay.
Mark Rosenthal, Precinct 14. I have some, well, let's first start with a different piece of literature than what we're familiar, what we usually hear here. Has to do with a fellow who wakes up one morning and finds that there's construction equipment in his yard to tear his house down. And it goes, but Mr. Dent, the plans have been available in the local planning office for the last 9 months. Oh yes, well, as soon as I heard, I went straight round to see them yesterday afternoon. You hadn't exactly gone out of your way to call attention to them, had you? I mean, like actually telling anybody or anything. But the plans were on display. On display? I eventually had to go down to the cellar to find them. That's the display department with a flashlight. Ah, well, the lights had probably gone. So had the stairs. But look, you found the notice, didn't you? Yes, said Arthur. Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet stuck in a disused laboratory with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." I and other town meeting members that I know, just in case you didn't recognize that, that's from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But Douglas Adams was very good at lampooning government behavior that, of questionable nature. I have been receiving calls, and so have other town meeting members that I know, from outraged residents of the town who never ever heard that anything was going on that was going to affect their houses and their lives until yesterday or the day before, by which time it's way too late. The process by which this, these proposals were developed does not well serve the people of the town, or harmony among members of the town, or respect for the town government. I'm sad to say, I wish it did. But what I have seen...
Mr. Rosenthal, I'm just going to ask if you have a point beyond just the notification process, which has been covered by at least a couple of speakers.
Okay. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a question from the pre-submit queue that was sent in advance. Ms. Thornton, if you want to come up while I ask your question, if we could scroll over. Ms. Thornton asks, and I'll start the clock. At a recent well-attended Zoom meeting representing a group of precincts in West Arlington, a few guests asked about the potential short and long-term economic impact of Article 12 on the town. Some participants responded that the impact would be positive, others that it would be negative. Will the town engage in a qualified professional financial analysis company to provide residents with an objective report on this question?
I'd like to direct that to Mr. Feeney.
Mr. Feeney, Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Feeney, Town Manager. Just going to take a closer look at the question. So, as it relates to the future financial impact, I know that we, received one model from a few residents. I can't sit here today and say I have some competing model or can predict the future about what's going to happen here.
Let me narrow down the question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Would you be willing, representing the town, would you be willing to invest in an objective, professional, outside, qualified company to come in and provide such a financial analysis?
I think that is a consideration we can make for sure. I think it's still going to be based on a number of what-if scenarios, though.
This isn't a negotiation, but...
Yeah, okay. So we'll look at it.
Yes, that we can consider that.
I think it's badly needed.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thornton. We'll next take the speaker queue, the handset queue. Let's see, Mr. Wagner already spoke. We'll take Mix Pretzer from the satellite room.
David Pretzer, Precinct 17. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So I'm in Precinct 17. I live very adjacently to where we'll be upzoned, and so I'd like to speak my perspective. Yes, this is a big change. It's one of the biggest zoning changes we've made in quite a while. I understand why this change is intimidating or makes people nervous.
Is there a point of order? I'm sorry, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But I want to highlight that doing nothing won't keep things the same. We can't avoid change. There are lots of things I love about Arlington, and the number one is the people here, my neighbors and your neighbors. If we don't allow more housing to be built, that means more seniors who need accessible dwellings as they lose mobility won't be able to stay in Arlington. More houses will be made into large, expensive mixed mansions instead of multifamily buildings, and more renters will be displaced by rising rents. I have a lot of neighbors who rent, and I'm sure many of you do as well. The renters I've talked to, the number one issue when I ask them what they care about in the town is the housing costs, worrying about not being able to stay in the town they love. They know that lack of building means that there's more and more competition for the same number of units, and that means rents skyrocket. And for a lot of people, that becomes very difficult to stay in their apartment or find a new apartment in Arlington. I also want to thank the working group. I think they did an extraordinary job reaching out in multiple ways with surveys and various types of meetings and directed outreach to include renters and other people that often are underrepresented in town meeting and town forums and include their perspectives. Obviously, the working group got a lot of different opinions, but I think they did a great job of boiling down the public feedback into a middle ground proposal that's a meaningful step forward for Arlington and for our neighbors. If we want to live our values, be a welcoming community, tell immigrants that they're welcome here and other underrepresented groups that they're welcome here, we need to build places where they can live. And so I think it's very important to vote yes on the main motion. I also think that if we want to get capital A affordable housing out of this, we need to make it possible to build larger buildings that will have 6 or more units to trigger inclusionary zoning. And so I think we should vote yes on the Fleming-Bagnall amendment because a 4-story building is going to have a much easier time triggering inclusionary zoning. And I want to particularly encourage you to vote no on the Evans amendment, which would dramatically reduce the amount of space that we include in the district and the potential of this to actually help our neighbors. For too many people in Arlington, a half measure will mean that by the time we come up with some follow-up thing, they'll already have been priced out of Arlington. And I think that would be a real shame. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to take, let's say this was a pre-submitted question. Mr. Fiore, if we can scroll over and I'll start the clock. How much, and so Mr. Fiore, you can come up and speak in your time as well. How much solid waste in tons or volume is estimated will be sent to landfills by the demolition of properties that will precede the new construction under Article 12?
According to keepmassbeautiful.org, I have some comments up there, Mr. Moderator. Do you not have them? Or?
Oh, I mean, I just have the comments. I assumed that they were not to be published.
Okay, I'll publish them now.
I can read them if you like. According to keepmassbeautiful.org, the landfills in Massachusetts are estimated to reach capacity and close by 2030.
Okay, so, and according, this may scare you, but like Will Rogers, I only know what I read in the Arlington Advocate and Star. And there was a statement in there by someone from the Conservation Law Foundation in a recent issue that Massachusetts has a solid waste problem. So I'm not standing up here to argue pro or con against this, but to just make the point that our representatives on Beacon Hill need to do more to address this. Because if you take...
Yeah, there's a different chamber for that. It's not this one, the State House.
Okay, so Mr. Moderator, if people want to yell scope, the way they do it is they rise, point of order, and they address you.
I'm not going to be lectured about how to handle shouts of scope. Okay. Okay. Do you have any substantive points? Because I'm not going to spend this time and waste the meeting's time when the clock is ticking discussing procedure.
I will, sir. So please support the Bobby Yar's amendment limiting the capacity of this for warrant Article 12. Okay, if we keep the units at around 2,000, then we reduce the amount of solid waste that we send to landfills. If 177 communities across Massachusetts that are in this with us do the same thing, then we can keep these landfills open longer and give the politicians on Beacon Hill time to address the issue. Thank you.
Mr. Foskett next.
Point of order.
Mr. Wagner? Mr. Foskett, you can come up.
I have point of order.
Yeah, we can do this in parallel. You can walk at the same time.
Thank you, Carl Wagner, Precinct 15, point of order. Surely, Mr. Moderator, the questions have been pre-screened by you and other people, and the last person was speaking exactly along the lines of his question. I would argue that the proponents of the
Mr. Wagner, let me
amended
cut you off
motion-
because everyone's time is very precious right now.
But
Mr.
if you have the
Fiore's
question, it is in
Mr. Fiore's question was in scope, and his pre-submitted question was in scope. His follow-up live question was not in scope. Therefore, I called his follow-up live question out of scope. Mr. Foskett, you have the floor. Let's try to limit the interruption and stop wasting everyone's time. Mr. Foskett, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Charles Foskett, Precinct 10. Thank you, fellow town meeting members. I rise to talk to you not about setbacks or trees or building heights, but about costs to the town and to the taxpayers. Zoning has a long-term effect, measured not in months or years, but in decades. And to clearly understand its impacts, we need to think about the end point, not next month or next year. So how can we compare municipal tax revenues and municipal service expense as they are related to this article? Taxes are collected on a per parcel or per area basis. Municipal service costs are driven by people served, a per capita basis. And to understand the financial impact of zoning changes, we need to think about households and people, not parcels and square feet. We also have to keep in mind that taxes come from residents, whether they are owners or renters. Owners pay taxes directly, and the renters pay through their monthly rental fee. The landlord is merely a conduit for the resident's tax payment. Based on last spring's Finance Committee report, net local expenses after external aid and local receipts was around $169 million. With its current population of 46,000 residents, the average municipal per capita expense is $3,673. Most recently, in the current fiscal year, the single-family tax bill in Arlington was around $10,228, and then based on an average of 2.25 people per household, the average tax revenue per capita from a single-family home is $4,546. That's $873 higher than the average per capita expense. For other types of households, starting with condos and moving through two-family, three-family, and several types of multi-unit residences and mixed-use buildings, the average per capita tax revenue contribution is less than the average cost per capita. And that difference ranges from 27% less to 69% less. Now, if you take an elderly relative or a parent, or me, elderly, in your home on a long-term basis, some of your costs will go up. You may have to build an accessory dwelling unit. You may not have to buy a new car, or you might have to if there's a handicap situation. But certainly your food costs and some of your other incidentals will rise. These costs go up because you're providing additional services to your new elderly household resident. These are your service costs rising with a population increase in your household. The same thing is true with respect to our town, including both town services and school services. When we increase population and population density, we increase municipal costs. Based on our method of taxation, when we increase multifamily housing, we increase per capita costs faster than we increase per capita revenue. This means that we're increasing our fiscal deficit, which can only be solved by raising taxes. Now, what supports this argument? First of all, in the economic literature, there's a very well-known report by Professor Helen Ladd of Duke University, who studied 267 counties across the U.S., definitively demonstrating that population density increases do not pay for themselves. Secondly, in the handout that we put in the back of the room and that's in your on the server, Mass Municipal data, that is the Department of Revenue data, comparing municipal expense versus population, shows a straight line positive correlation between population and municipal expense. And finally, our own Arlington School Committee for the last decade has demanded for each increased student, we have to add 50% of the average reported educational cost per student to the base school budget for the following year. This year, that increments about $8,000 per student. Alan Jones, Topher Haim, and I have done an analysis that argues that possible increases at the low end of additional households, as mentioned by the ARB, of 50 to 200 units can generate deficits in the range of $200,000. If the number of new households rises to the thousands, the need for additional taxes will rise to millions of dollars. Now, on Monday night, the chairman of the Board of Assessors noted that our analysis was incorrect because the data the director of assessments gave us was only 56% of the chairman's hypothetical assessed value of the parcel at 892 Mass Avenue. I would counter that we used the value that was on the town database given to us by the town director of assessors, and I would hope that any future assessment is based on an actual valuation, not a back-of-the-envelope estimate. Even if the current assessment is increased by 44%, the chair's hypothetical tax revenue would rise from the current $31,383 to $56,000. And with the minimum of 22 residents, that is one per household, the per capita revenue would be $25.48, which is still 30% less than the town's average per capita expense. And if there were 1.5 residents per household in that new building, the per capita revenue would be 53% below the average per capita expense. Our analysis is not, as the chairman stated, flawed, fatally flawed. In fact, his example testifies to its accuracy. There may be many reasons to increase household density in Arlington, but reducing deficits is not one of them. Personally, I intend to vote for the main motion and the amendments except for the Bagnell amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foskett. And we're going to pipeline this a little bit. Let's scroll to Ms. LaCourte's question. Ms. LaCourte, you can come up, and then I'll take Mr. Holland next on deck. The question is, would the town manager or finance director like to speak to the question of whether or not we can predict the effect of Article 12 on the town's finances? Would the town manager or finance director wish to answer that question?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Feeney, Town Manager. I don't think I'd be in a position to predict the future for you.
That was kind of what I thought you would say. If I can continue and ask a couple of other questions. When we budget, how often do we budget according to the population of the town versus the cost of the services we want to deliver?
I would say that each year when we build the town's budget, the only population metric that is taken into account is the number of pupils.
Okay. And households, solid waste?
We don't do it specifically by number of households, but yes, more people does mean more waste.
More solid waste. But other sections of the budget, for example, snow and ice?
No, the roads and sidewalks remain the same, no matter how many populations you...
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think she wants the stage alone.
Yeah. Sorry, Annie LaCourte, Precinct 13, proud graduate of the Yale Drama School. Anyways, so I want to talk a little bit about prediction and risk and crisis. So it's very difficult for us to predict the financial future of the town. We do have a 5-year plan, but if you look at the 5-year plan as written in 2018 and you compare it to the 5-year plan as written in 2023, you will see very different bottom line numbers because over the course of those 5 years, things change. Mr. Foskett is suggesting that our expenses are going to go up a couple $100,000. Our deficit will increase by that much, according to the population growth predicted by this model. But we voted to increase our budget by about $200,000 on Monday night last week, or Tuesday night last week? Anyways, one of those nights last week.
It's all a blur.
And we did that without increasing our population at all. The reason that the Finance Committee did not provide a report to you on the effect of this article on our future expenses, at least in part, admittedly, a lot of it was because we're really not supposed to weigh in on zoning articles, but at least in part it was because The complexity of the variables that we would need to measure to do that prediction and the amount of data from the past we would have to collect is more complicated than just looking at population growth. Because other things affect both our expenses and our revenue. So yes, maybe our expenses go up, but you also have to look at the things that affect our revenue. And sometimes we get very lucky, and sometimes we don't. And we can't predict that future. So what are we doing if we vote in this article and it increases our population? We're taking a little bit of a risk. We're risking something for the future. The question is, what is the reward of taking that risk? And I think that that risk is low compared to the reward that we could potentially gain. We might bend the cost curve on the increase in the growth of cost of housing in Arlington. We might mitigate climate change by increasing the number of energy efficient multifamily units in town and close to transportation corridors and reducing the number of people depending on cars to commute long distances to get to their places of work. We actually have a triple crisis. We have the housing crisis that our senator so eloquently described, so eloquently that I'm not even going to bother to try to change anything about what she said about the nature of the housing crisis. We also have a climate crisis, so that to gain the fossil fuel pilot and to increase density near the city and to increase the energy efficiency of homes and reduce the reliance on cars, all of those things are helping us buy a future for our children. And we have an equity crisis. So creating more different kinds of housing, yes, market rate housing included, means that we will create greater equity in the Boston MSA. And for those of us in social services, the metropolitan statistical area is how we look at everything. So the question isn't just equity for people living in Arlington or diversity in Arlington, it's regional protection through filtering. I have friends who live in Mattapan who would like to stay in their homes. And their homes are at risk if we're not building housing here. And so that brings me to this idea of neighbors and what this, how much time have I got left? Okay, I got a couple seconds. So what makes this town what it is for me is the people who live here, and that's been said by other people, okay? When I first moved here, one of the advantages of living here was that my kids were going to school with the kids of plumbers and nurses and teachers and social workers. And I worry about a future where the children of Arlington are only going to school with doctors and software engineers and entrepreneurs, and that they live in some kind of a bubble that was not the life that I wanted for my children because it wasn't how I grew up. I grew up on a street with middle managers like my dad and guys who worked on the line like our next door neighbor, and I went to school with their kids. And we all had different ambitions, and we all had different ways of living, and we learned a lot about each other from those differences. Preserving our economic diversity is very important to me. So I urge you to vote yes on the main motion, and I urge you to vote down all of the amendments that would reduce the scope of the main motion. I would love to tell you that you should vote for Bagnell-Fleming, and you should, as long as you don't think it's going to tank the main motion. So that is my one concern about that particular amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Holland, you're up next, and then Ms. Weiner, you're on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rod Holland, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. I'd like to share with you an observation and a cautionary tale. The observation is this. A while back, along with, I think, most of the people in this room, received a briefing about the MBTA Communities Initiative. And there was an odd thing, which was that two-family houses weren't considered multifamily. This created a bit of cognitive dissonance, in my brain anyway. And anyway, everything that's happened since has happened. and they're still not considered multifamily for purposes of the Act. So the conclusion I draw from that is that whoever is in charge of maps for how the overlay works needs to have a little care, because we have these neighborhoods of two-family houses that have been historically great resources for bringing people into the town. And it's the nature of that has changed on and off over the years. I remember when the Housing Corporation of Arlington was helping fund two-family condo conversions for sweat equity as an affordable housing ploy. Worked really well for a while because the prices of those things were depressed at that time, not now. So that's thing number one. That's the observation. The cautionary tale has to do with another Arlington, in this case Arlington, Virginia. There's kind of a main drag in Arlington, Virginia called Columbia Pike, which has always had a lot of residential real estate on it. It turns out my grandmother lived there for part of her life, and in the 1950s, I was this little kid visiting my grandmother, and the adults were talking about apartment buildings which were being built on Columbia Pike, and they were big, beautiful, I thought, and 7 years old or whatever I was, things with swimming pools, cool. And the grown-ups were talking about the fact that the owners of the single-family homes that had preceded the apartment buildings were getting approached and were getting these really great offers for their houses. And a lot of them took it, and to make a long story short, and that really is ultimately probably the point of this cautionary tale, the whole thing was over in 2 years, or at least the part that I could observe as a kid. It went faster than anybody had anticipated, and soon I had cousins living in the apartments. So the takeaway here is that the prediction for how long it will take for capacity to turn into redevelopment, maybe it'll take all that time. Or maybe it'll be quick, and if it's quick, it will produce some changes for those of us who are kind of fond of the current system. But, maybe there'll be the changes that are hoped for. But just be aware it could happen very quickly. Sometimes it does. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take Ms. Weiner next. She had a pre-submitted question. Can we scroll over? I'll start the clock. Ms. Weiner, while you come up, if you have anything more to say, can the ARB be given time to offer their position or opinion on all the amendments? The answer is yes. Next speaker? Just kidding. Be careful how you ask the questions.
Yes, you want me to answer? Yes.
Ms. Zembury, you can go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. Rachel Zembury, Chair of the Redevelopment Board. I think I'll start with the Evans amendment. I'll just run through them all quickly, if that's...
There was a report on some of them on Monday, wasn't there?
We identified which, we did not create a report because we just met on Monday to review all of these. I have my notes, and I'm happy to review my notes if that would be helpful, but we have not had a public meeting since then in order to be able to publish a report. Really briefly, some of the discussion around the amendments, again, I'll start with the Evans amendment. In this discussion, in terms of not being in favor of supporting this amendment, the redevelopment board noted that the map that we have is the result of a almost year-long community engagement process. And in that, in terms of meeting with the town, the public, as well as town officials, including the superintendent of schools and many other department heads, included requesting that the working group equitably distribute the overlay district across the town and across feeder neighborhoods to all of the public schools, the elementary schools. So it was carefully calculated and balanced with that in mind, and in noting that we already allow 2.5 story buildings by right in these residential neighborhoods. So moving to a 3-story population is not, even depending on the topography, is not a particularly difficult leap. And it's a reasonable step up from the development on the main corridors. Moving to the Babiar's amendment, that zoning, that amendment, we don't believe that is in compliance with the MBTA community's requirements because it imposes a requirement for the multifamily district that is not imposed elsewhere in the zoning bylaws in town. And we run the risk of the Attorney General throwing out the entire plan if town meeting moves forward with that amendment. In terms of the Warden, Article 1, we believe that
That's been withdrawn.
That's right, that's been removed. Warden, Article 2, we believe that significantly reduces to a completely undevelopable parcel size the amount of redevelopment space because of the inappropriate use of the term structure, which could be referred to as fence or other areas. It seriously constrains the development opportunity on those sites to basically making the neighborhood development areas completely undevelopable under the plan. The Anderson Amendment, again, we believe that the option for businesses on the second floor is something that we support. We're concerned about providing a specific percentage, but are overall in support of that as an option for the mixed-use zoning bonus. The Loretti number 1 amendment, I believe that Jean Benson spoke about that one, that we believe that the 15% requirement for landscape is already well included within the front and rear yard setbacks. And the footnote in the dimensional table is actually stronger than this landscape amendment that is proposed. In terms of Loretti number 2, again, I addressed this one on Monday night. We believe that 13-foot is the industry standard rather than 11-foot based on the flexibility with mixed use and residential construction, especially when we get into the bonuses, and because some of these maybe deeper units, having a larger floor-to-floor allows more natural light to permeate throughout the space. In Loretti number 3, there have been a couple questions that have come to me about LEED certification versus certifiable, and specifically around what are the teeth that the town might have in terms of being able to ensure that a project actually does become certified. I spoke about the difference between certified and certifiable on Monday. And in speaking with Director Champa from ISD and Director Ricker, we are able, under the rules and regulations of the redevelopment board as part of the site plan review process, to identify checkpoints along the way to ensure that the developments are in compliance and moving towards the official certification given by the Green Building Certification Institute. And Director Champa indicated that the occupancy permit could be pulled if they did not comply. So there are significant teeth to be able to ensure that that is in compliance. Let's see. Which ones have I not gotten to? Wagner, number 1, with regard to the allowing the Mass Ave and Broadway multifamily districts to extend one parcel into the neighborhood multifamily districts. We had a long discussion about this at the redevelopment board, and the reason why we recommended allowing that to move one parcel into, to have the first parcel when you combine two parcels, one on Mass Ave and one in the neighborhood district, to be subject to the Mass Ave, or thank you, Broadway requirements, is because we have so many shallow lots on Mass Ave and Broadway, and this allows us to have a parcel consolidation that is developable and something that is actually makes developing a parcel and putting a real quantity of residences that would allow us to have the affordable zoning incentive taken into consideration viable. Let's see, the Wagner number 2, again, the proposal to remove the bonuses we are not in agreement with, because again, the 3 bonuses are the desires of the community. That's what we heard from the community, that those 3 bonuses are strongly desired, and that's why they were developed. And the Leone proposal, I think we have no...
We're at time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it's 9:31. Let's take a break for 10 minutes, and we're going to start at 9:41 sharp. And Ms. Noah, you're going to be starting us off. Thank you. Okay, we're getting started, whether you're getting your seats or keep talking or not. Mr. Revlock, you have the floor. We're moving along. Mr. Revlock, you're up. Everyone, please find your seats. The train is leaving the station. Everyone give Mr. Revlock your attention, please. Ms. Noah was not here, so we're going to Mr. Revlock. Mr. Revlock, you have the floor.
Well, Mr. Moderator, I actually don't recall putting myself on the CANSET queue, but since I'm here, I'm going to pass. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Hold your applause until someone terminates debate. Just kidding. Mr. Klein. Okay. Ms. Bergman.
Robin Bergman, Precinct 12. Good evening. There is criticism that many of the restrictive zoning policies that we have had in place are more than 50 years old, and yet we are about to make the very same mistake. We should be allowing flexibility for future generations for what might be unforeseen now. Before we make bigger zoning changes that we need to make, we should at least build in opportunities to stop and reevaluate impacts these changes will bring on affordability, climate resilience, as this part of the globe is heating up faster than anywhere else, town services, taxes, and overall quality of life. I particularly want to support amendments to Article 12 by Anderson, Babiarz, Evans, Lane, Loretti, Wagner, and Worden, and oppose the Bagnell-Fleming amendment, which will loom too high over adjacent houses, blocking solar panels and gardens, creating heat islands. Given how built out and expensive our town is already, we should be prioritizing affordable housing, especially for those who are under the area median income, rather than building more market rate luxury housing if we truly wish to be more diverse and welcoming. Our own inclusionary zoning bylaw is much stronger than the state's at every 1 in 6 units, i.e. 15% at 60% AMI, rather than 1 in 10 at 80%. There is no guarantee that the state will approve our zoning change request. I understand that Lincoln's request was just denied at 15% at 80 AMI. There is no guarantee that building loads of market rate units will bring prices down and make them affordable. According to a June article in Barron's entitled "Homes Are Expensive, Building More Won't Solve the Problem," there is a 3.5 million unit surplus of housing nationwide, and, quote, census data show that these housing affordability problems largely reflect a mismatch between household incomes and housing prices, unquote. Another piece from Vice in July entitled "U.S. Building More Apartments Than It Has in Decades, But Not for the Poor" reports that even though housing construction has reached a 50-year high, the amount of affordable units for the lowest income groups has decreased nationwide. And to quote from a piece from a week ago in Jacobin, looking at policies and data in California, which has pressures similar to our own and often leads the nation on policy and its implementation, quote, as rents continue to soar across the state, evictions surge, and the unhoused population swells, Californians have debated what the root of the problem is. Many have focused on the failure of cities to permit new housing construction and of the private market to build enough housing. But tenant advocates note that market rate housing construction has proceeded apace. Between 2013 and 2022, California overproduced market rate housing by more than 200,000 homes, 43% more than its official target. By contrast, housing production lagged the state's target for the lowest income households by 50%. Even more damning for the supply side diagnosis, much of the high rent housing produced is lying vacant, held for its value not as shelter but as investment vehicles. The private housing market has failed to meet the needs of the vast majority of California residents who are unable to afford market rents. Increasingly, housing speculation and financialization in the rental market is driving rents higher even as new market rate housing is produced, unquote. And to mention one more piece, actually a study from the Brookings Institute, upzoning and building more market rate housing accelerates gentrification, displacement, and makes towns more white and affluent. We might want to leave room for an affordable housing overlay that, if policies just implemented in Cambridge are any indication, will be coming next and would allow us to implement our own inclusionary zoning bylaw rather than tying up more than is necessary to meet this state mandate. There are many more issues, like the debate over parking and whether to discourage people from owning cars. It is not realistic to expect everyone to ride a bicycle, walk, or take mass transit everywhere, even though it is something to aspire to. For example, I am taking care of an ill person who is not able to get around by themselves, and I need to be able to drive that person to doctor appointments. I work in a place that is difficult to get to with just mass transit, especially the hours I need to work and my need to transport materials. And I don't have to tell you how our mass transit is lacking service, reach, frequency, with no plans to improve it much anytime soon. I took a bus recently to somewhere that would take 10 minutes to reach by car. The first bus was running more than 30 minutes late and never came, and the second one was running another 20 minutes late. It took over an hour to reach my destination. In short, we should be making what are the least disruptive and least far-reaching changes to our zoning now and see how it goes as we can add more later, thoughtfully and carefully, so that we maintain the wonderful town that we all love. Please support the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Penneron, do you wish to pass? Yeah. Ms. Anderson already presented. Ms. Gittleson. And while Ms. Gittleson comes up, are there any objections to me allowing a motion to terminate debate from the pre-submit queue? Hearing none, I will allow motions to terminate debate from pre-submit queue. Oh, you said no? Oh, there were no's? Oh, okay, okay. But the answer would be yes, there are objections, but okay. Ms. Gittleson. So I won't do it, I won't do it, okay.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Laura Gittleson, Precinct 17. I move to terminate debate on Article 12 and all items.
Okay, hold on. I guess I did say you could do that, but do we have a second? All those in favor of terminating debate say on Article 12 and all matters before it, say yes. Yes. All those opposed? No. It is a 2/3 vote. So we will now run through all the amendments and then finally the main motion as amended or not. Okay. So let's bring up, and we'll step through this. We're at 9:51 here, so we have time to do this, and we should do this carefully. Let's bring up the Wagner Amendment 1, please. Thank you. Okay. So, we just lost it. Okay, and so let me summarize while that's coming up. Wagner Amendment 1, this is in section 591, titled Multifamily Housing Overlay Districts, amend item C, so that in two places. One, proposed development located within both districts are subject to the provisions of NMF, Neighborhood Multifamily Overlay District, rather than the MBMF, Mass Ave Broadway Multifamily District, recommended by the ARB. And the second change in that section, 591C, is to strike the parcel depth limit for which the previous provisions apply. That's the amendment that we're voting on next, that would amend the main motion in these ways that I just described and you see here on the screen, and you should have printouts or have the annotated warrant in front of you. And all these motions are pending before us, so let's now take a vote on Wagner Amendment 1, please. Let's bring that up. Okay, as soon as the green light comes on, voting is now open. So again, if you wish to amend the main motion, the recommended vote of the ARB with the Wagner Amendment 1, you'd vote 1 for yes. If you want to leave the main motion unamended by this amendment, press 2 for no, to not apply the amendment, and 3 to abstain. This is all the amendments are majority votes, always. Okay. Voting is closed, and it fails. 58 in the affirmative, 167 in the negative. Let's now bring up the Babiar's amendment. So look at this, and we'll scroll through, and I'll give a summary. In section 591, again titled Multifamily Housing Overlay Districts, add a new item D that limits the number of units permitted as of right under the MBMF, the Mass Ave Broadway Multifamily, and the NMF, the Neighborhood Multifamily Overlay Districts, to no more than 2,050 units. This is still above the 2,046 that's required by the state organization. Okay, so let's now bring up a vote on the Babiar's amendment. Is there a point? Nothing? Okay. Okay, so if you're in favor of this change to put a limit of 2,050 units to apply the Babiar's amendment, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed to this amendment, press 2 for no to leave the main motion unamended. And press 3 for abstaining. Okay, voting is closed, and the motion fails. 49 in the affirmative, 174 in the negative. That now brings up, let's say the Warden 1 amendment was withdrawn. That brings us to Loretti Amendment 1. This does two things, essentially. We have it up here. Thank you. The first thing is section 594D, item 8. Delete the words landscaped or. And the second thing is in the same item, 59D, item 8, append a requirement that the minimum landscaped open space is 15% of the lot area. Okay, so let's bring up a vote now on Loretti Amendment 1. If you're in favor of this amendment, voting is now open now. If you're in favor of the Loretti 1 amendment, amendment to the main motion, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed to this amendment, press 2 for no, or press 3 to abstain. This is section 594D, item 8 of the ARB's recommended vote. Okay, voting is closed. And the motion fails. 58 in the affirmative, 164 in the negative. Let's now move on to the Bagnall-Fleming amendment. Let's bring that up. Thank you. This changes 2 sections. First, in section 594D, item 10, in the table of dimensional requirements, change the rows labeled max height stories and max height in feet to increase the NMF, or neighborhood multifamily, max height in stories from 3 to 4 stories, and the max height in feet from 35 to 46 feet. And the second change is reflects this in another section. In section 594E, item 4, replaced the text 3 stories, 35 feet with 4 stories, 46 feet, reflecting the same change effectively in the 2 sections, 594D, item 1, and 594E, item 4. Okay, let's bring up a vote now on the Bagnall-Fleming amendment. Voting is now open. If you're in favor of amending the main motion with the Bagnall-Fleming amendment, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed, press 2 for no. Press 3 to abstain. Voting is still open. Make sure to check your handsets that the votes did register back on the digital display in your handsets. Voting is closed. And it fails. 57 in the affirmative, 162 in the negative. That brings up the Anderson secondary amendment. So if we can scroll down. This is a secondary amendment, which means this is the most complicated thing we're going to do tonight. It's an amendment to the main motion. We're 2 levels deep. You can't go any deeper than that. The red text here you see in the center is all that we're voting on with the secondary amendment. It changes the word will, which is a requirement, to may, permission. Did I get that right, Mr. Cunningham? Okay. So if you are in favor of Ms. Anderson's secondary amendment to make that change from will to may after second floor, you vote 1 for yes, and voting is open. So if you're in favor of changing that one word following second floor from will to may in that amendment, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed to modifying the Anderson amendment with that one word change, press 2 for no. Otherwise, press 3 to abstain. Okay, voting is now closed. And the motion passes 201 in the affirmative, 17 in the negative. That brings up the Anderson amendment as amended. So let's scroll down now. And so this text, I believe, is... Oh, what is this? Is this not Anderson? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we need, thank you, Ms. Brazeau. We need to go back to Anderson. The Anderson primary amendment, but we just call it the Anderson amendment. Okay. And so now we can all just imagine that the word will stricken does not exist, and the word may looks like all the other underlined text. And so hold on. So let me just, okay, can you go back for a sec? Thank you. And so I'm just going to describe what we're doing here, because we're changing more than one word here. In section 594E, titled Bonuses, the Anderson Amendment adds text in item 1, under 594E1. It adds the text, the second floor will be at least 40% occupied by childcare, health, business. Oh, I might have said the wrong word. I did, didn't I? The second floor may be at least 40% occupied by childcare, health, business, professional or medical services. If you're in favor of that, you would vote yes for the Anderson amendment to amend the main motion the recommended vote of the ARB. So let's now open voting on the Anderson amendment. If you're in favor of amending the main motion with the Anderson amendment as amended by the Anderson secondary amendment, vote 1 for yes. If you're opposed to amending the main motion with the Anderson amendment as amended by the Anderson secondary amendment, press 2 for no. This is the worst part of it. And then you can abstain with 3. Okay. Voting is closed. And it passes. 203 in the affirmative, 22 in the negative. The main motion is now amended by the Anderson amendment, amended by the Anderson secondary amendment.
Yay, Kristen!
Next up is the Lane amendment. And let me describe what this does here, but you should go by the vote language. I'm just summarizing so you know what I'm talking about. In section 594E, titled bonuses, same section that we just looked at in the last amendment, does 3 things. In item 1, strike the text, and the front yard setback requirement is reduced to 0 feet. It appears twice. Strike it in both places. 2, in item 1, also, add at the end this sentence, furthermore, which I won't read here. It's basically a paragraph there. You can all read it. What the heck, I'll just read it. Furthermore, properties satisfying the non-residential/commercial ground floor percentages stated above may avail themselves of a reduction in the front yard setback to 0 feet, in which case, however, their height shall not exceed 4 stories, 52 feet within the MBMF, the Mass Ave Broadway Multifamily Overlay District on Massachusetts Avenue, and 3 stories, 39 feet in the MBMF Overlay District on Broadway, irrespective of their qualification for any additional bonuses described below. It's referring to the bonuses section. And then the third thing that it does, in the item 4, after the word bonuses, insert the text, for all buildings with a minimum front yard setback of 15 feet. Now, if we can scroll down to see this in context, I asked Mr. Lane to not put this in the vote language because it might be amended and nullify his amendment, but this is what it would look like. So what we're seeing here is just in the comment. This is not the literal vote language. You actually have to kind of like stitch it together yourself. We couldn't do all 10,000 combinations of these. So this is what it would look like if amending the recommended vote of the ARB that's otherwise unamended, but now has been amended by the Anderson amendment. We clear? So you have to kind of do that stitching yourself. Mr. Jameson. Is there 15-foot setback? Is there something about a 15-foot setback? See. You can scroll to the bottom. I think you just have to go down further, maybe. There it is. Thank you. Thank you. So here you can see the change in context, but this comment was written against the ARB's recommended vote. So if the Anderson amendment would have interfered with this, for instance, when it gets applied to the main motion, that might be off. So what we're adding here is the for all buildings with a minimum front yard setback of 15 feet. Okay. So let's now open voting on the Lane amendment. If you're in favor of the Lane amendment that we just ran through, amending the main motion, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed to amending the main motion with the Lane amendment, press 2 for no, and press 3 to abstain. Voting is still open for a couple seconds. Verify that you voted. And voting's closed. And the Lane amendment fails. 59 in the affirmative, 159 in the negative. That brings us up to Loretti Amendment 2. Okay. And this makes changes in 2 sections. In 594D, item 1, in the table, change 52, the number 52, to 45 for the max height in feet under both the MBMF on Mass Ave and MBMF on Broadway. In 594E, paragraphs 1 and 4, change the corresponding text. So change 78 feet to 66 feet and change 65 feet to 55 feet. If you scroll down, I'm not sure if we have it in context or not. I don't think we do. So you'd have to look at the recommended vote of the ARB to see the literal language. And we couldn't put that in the vote language because it would interfere with other amendments. So we had to keep them independent as best we could. Okay, so this is decreasing the max height in feet in two different sections, 594D item 10 and 594E paragraphs 1 and 4. So let's now open voting on Loretti Amendment 2. Okay. Voting is now open. If you're in favor of amending the main motion with the Loretti Amendment 2, press 1 for yes. If you don't want to amend the main motion with the Loretti Amendment 2, vote 2 for no. To leave the main motion as is. And vote 3, press 3 to abstain. Okay, voting is now closed, and the motion fails. 63 in the affirmative, 160 in the negative. We're now on to the Warden Amendment 2. So you scroll down, Warden Amendment 1 was withdrawn. Warden Amendment 2. Point of order? Can you come to a microphone so we can hear?
Joe Babiars, Precinct 15. I'm not sure I do this correctly, but on behalf of Mr. Warden, I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to change the word structure.
Debate's terminated, and we have no speaker queue from which to take motions at this time.
Okay, sorry.
So Warden Amendment 2, I'll just try to summarize best I can. In section 594D, titled Dimensional Requirements again, item 10 in the table under the column, under the NMF column, the Neighborhood Multifamily column, in the line, this is helpful if you have the ARB's recommended vote in front of you to see this in context. The NMF column, the minimum front yard setback row, strike out 15 feet from that table, from that cell in the table, and insert in R1 25 feet and in R2 20 feet. So it's setting two different minimum front yard setback requirements depending on whether it's in R1 or R2. If it's in R1, 25-foot setback instead of 15, in R2, a 20-foot setback instead of 15 feet. And in the separate line or row titled minimum side yard setback, add a note, provided that the wall of the new structure is at least 20 feet from the structure on the adjoining lot. And so it doesn't specify in here, I don't recall if we brought this up on Monday, because the vote language does not specify, and I didn't catch this earlier, I apologize, it doesn't specify how exactly the note is added. How I'm interpreting that, and Mr. Cunningham, correct me if there's any issue with this, would be that it would that we would add an asterisk by the row title and add a footnote with an asterisk that has this text, and we implement the note in that way. That is my interpretation. Okay, so that is what we're voting on. So if you're in favor of increasing these minimum front yard setbacks in the R1 and R2 districts to 25 and 20 feet respectively, and then also adding the note, provided that the wall on the new structure is at least 20 feet from the structure on the adjoining lot. If you're in favor of this amendment, you would vote yes on the Warden Amendment 2. So let's now open voting. All those in favor of the Warden 2 amendment, voting is now open. Press 1 for yes. To accept the amendment, to amend the main motion, press 2 to, if you do not wish to amend the main motion with the Warden Amendment 2, and press 3 to abstain. Okay, voting is closed. And it fails. 42 in the affirmative, 176 in the negative. That brings us to Loretti Amendment 3. Okay. And what this does in section 594E, titled Bonuses, delete number 3, which granted an additional story for LEED, L-E-E-D, or equivalent, and renumber the rest. So it just strikes out this provision for allowing an additional story for LEED Gold certified or equivalent level of alternate green building standard review and approved by the redevelopment board. This is Loretti Amendment 3. So let's now open voting on this amendment. Voting is now open. If you wish to amend the main motion with Loretti Amendment 3 to strike 594E number 3 and renumber the remainder of items, press 1 for yes. If you wish to not apply this amendment to the main motion, vote 2 for no, or press 3 to abstain. Okay, voting is now closed, and the motion fails. 59 in the affirmative, 163 in the negative. That brings us to the Wagner Amendment 2. This seeks to amend 2 sections. First, delete the entirety of section 594E titled Bonuses from the main motion. That's why we're doing it after the others, because it might have wiped them out if it changed them. And then the second thing it does in section 594D, item 10, remove the reference to the bonuses section because it would no longer exist. So this amendment seeks to eliminate the 594E bonuses section from the main motion, whatever its contents are at this point. So let's open voting. If you're in favor of voting is now open. If you're in favor of Wagner Amendment 2, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed and you want to leave the main motion not amended by the Wagner Amendment 2, press 2 for no, and press 3 if you wish to abstain. Make sure to check your handsets to see that your vote got in. Okay, let's close voting. And the motion fails. 53 in the affirmative, 164 in the negative. Okay, that brings us to the Evans Amendment. And this makes 3 changes, like overall, high-level changes to the main motion's Arlington Heights Neighborhood Multifamily District. First, it deletes 95 parcels, I counted them, from the Neighborhood Multifamily Subdistrict parcel list. Second, it adds 3 Lowell Street parcels. If we scroll to the bottom of this list of 95, yep, and then we have 3 parcels on Lowell Street. And then third, it adds 2 Mass Ave fronting parcels to the Arlington Heights Neighborhood Multifamily District parcel lists that appear in the zoning map. Scroll down to the map. Is the map on here? I think it is. Yep. So the deleted parcels are in red. It looks like they're, is it the ones that are south of Mass Ave? Yeah. And then there's the added parcels. Where are they? Oh, I see. Well, my pointing to it isn't going to help. These are added. And then these are removed from the parcel list. Okay. Let's open voting on the Evans Amendment. If you're in favor of these changes to the parcel lists in the zoning map, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed to these changes in the parcel lists relative to the ARB's recommendation, press 2 for no. And press 3 to abstain. Make sure to check your handsets to confirm that your vote was registered. Voting is now closed. and the amendment fails. 76 in the affirmative, 144 in the negative. And finally, among the amendments, we have the Leone Amendment. And this adds a parcel at 5 to 7 Winter Street to the parcel list of the NMF subdistrict, the Neighborhood Multifamily Overlay District. Do we have a map under this? I don't remember. You can look it up on your phones. It's one address, essentially. Okay, so let's open voting on the Leone Amendment. Okay, voting is now open. If you want to make this, add this one parcel at 5 to 7 Winter Street to the parcel list for the Neighborhood Multifamily Subdistrict, press 1 for yes. If you want to leave the parcel lists unamended, press 2 for no. Press 3 to abstain. Okay, voting is closed. And the motion fails. 99 in the affirmative, 106 in the negative. Okay. So that now brings us to the main motion as amended by the Anderson Amendment, as amended by the Anderson Secondary Amendment. So this is the whole thing. All right, so let me review now what we're doing at a high level in the main motion. Let me bring up my notes. Right. Okay. So the two main high-level things we're doing here is amend Section 2, titled Definitions in the zoning bylaw, adding 4 definitions. There's as-of-right development, multifamily housing, overlay district, and site plan review. The second thing the main motion does is it renumbers Section 5.9 in the zoning bylaw to 5.10, and it inserts a new Section 5.9 titled Multifamily Housing Overlay Districts established under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A, Section 3A, with the following subsections. 591, I'm not going to read all the detail, but just the high level. 591, multifamily housing overlay districts with items A, B, C. Section 592, purposes with items A through F. I'm sorry, A through H. Section 593, site plan review, which is a single paragraph. Section 594, development standards with items A through I. And the one departure from the ARB's recommended vote is the Anderson Amendment as amended by the secondary Anderson Amendment, the Anderson Secondary Amendment. Okay, so let's open voting now on the main motion as amended. And the quantum of vote is majority. All those in favor, if you're in favor of, I'm not doing a voice vote. If you're in favor of the main motion as amended by the Anderson Amendment, press 1 for yes. If you're opposed to the main motion as amended by the Anderson Amendment, press 2 for no, press 3 to abstain. Make sure your vote is recorded. And the motion passes. Okay. All right, hold on. 189 the affirmative, 35 in the negative is a majority vote. Article 12 is now disposed of. Ms. Deschler?
Christine Deschler, Chair of the Finance Committee. I move that Article 1 be taken from the table.
We have a second. Article. One second. Okay. Ms. Deschler?
It is moved that the October 2023 Arlington Special Town Meeting be dissolved.
Do we have a second? Second. Okay. All those in favor of dissolving the special town meeting, say yes. Yes. All those opposed, say no. It's not unanimous, but it is a majority vote. The special town meeting is dissolved. Thank you.